Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. It is Monday night. It's October 7th, 2024. That's right. RFM always date checks me. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's a lot of stress. I have to print out giant printouts of the date and put them by my computer so I don't make a mistake.
I missed the entire month a couple of weeks ago when it was in September and I said October. I got the day right, just the month wrong. And I've gotten the years wrong too.
Notice I never correct you. So I don't know what that says, but I never do. I just
You're not
let
paying
it slide.
attention. Huh.
Anyway, welcome everybody. I'm here with my ever awe-inspiring colleagues, Radio Free Mormon. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking.
Excellent. And Bill Reel, of course. How are you?
I'm exceptional. How are you doing? How was your day?
You know what? Not too bad. It's the Monday after conference, and there are always varied reactions when you wake up that day and you think, was that a nightmare? Was it a dream? Did I recover? You know, there's all kinds of things that go through your mind, but we had to forge ahead because we're going to bring you an episode of the Mormon Newscast where we cover some elements of conference. Now, there was a lot going on. If any of you watched it or even tuned in and out, there was so much going on. We can't possibly cover everything. RFM, I know, covered the second day, right? You had your broadcast.
I covered the second day and also covered the first day in the second day. But yes, exactly. You know, these leaders of the church are getting so old that General Conference is the slowest moving train wreck I've ever seen.
There you go. And I know Nemo also always has a wonderful conference blow by blow following each session. And we're going to do just, a little bit of a version of that. And we have kind of an interesting spin on it because Bill didn't watch conference at all. And good for him, I say, had much better things to do than that. So as we go through some of these stories that RFM and I consider kind of the top stories, the most interesting and important stories of the last weekend, Bill has no idea what we're talking about. So we're going to get his unscripted, off the cuff opinion on everything that we're talking about. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting. Are you guys ready?
Ready. Oh, I better be ready. I'm up first, am I not?
That's right. You are. So let's first go to the slides and I'll run through what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about, is President Nelson telling stories again? I think you probably can all guess what we're talking about. Temporary commandments. It's the end of the world as we know it. And you get a temple, you get a temple, you get a temple. Everyone in the entire world gets a temple. And those are our stories today, but we're going to lead with what I saw the most posting about on social media, the most buzz is President Nelson and that story that he told. So let's just turn it right over to RFM. Take us away with what is happening here.
I will do my best. Thank you so much for the introduction, Rebecca. We are revisiting the incident at Mozambique, which is the name of this tall tale that both President Nelson and Wendy Nelson have told at different events over the years since 2009, when this allegedly happened in Mozambique. Now, let me go to this next clip because this is about a couple minutes. Here is where President Nelson, in his pre-recorded statement, which was played at the end of the Sunday afternoon session, he was physically present in the conference center. But then they played a pre-recorded message of him as if he's sitting there in the conference center giving the message. Anyway, that's how it plays out. But this is what was said. He doesn't mention it's Mozambique, but believe me, when you study this incident as much as I have over the years, you know immediately what he's talking about because there's one particular element of the story that is unique.
Later, I married my beloved wife, Wendy. She was a central part of my second example. When Wendy and I were on an assignment in a distant land, armed robbers put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger. But the gun didn't fire. Throughout that experience, both of our lives were threatened. Yet Wendy and I felt an undeniable peace. It was the peace which passeth all understanding. Brothers and sisters, the Lord will comfort you too. He will strengthen you. He will bless you with peace, even amidst chaos.
So it's interesting. First thing I notice is that the way he tells that story, he doesn't even tell the story. He tells one piece of the story. He doesn't mention it's in Mozambique. He doesn't give all the surrounding details, which have been elaborated upon over the years since 2009. I don't even think he mentions it was in 2009. But let's go and let's follow this a little bit as we lead up to this, because as I say, this is the first appearance of this story, I believe, in General Conference. It's been in a book, it's been in addresses in different places, but not in General Conference. So I guess it was ready for the big time. Let me see here if I can find. Yeah, there we are. I had to go back and find this because I had covered this story in a Radio Free Mormon episode. This is back before I went video. This is just audio. And I looked at this and I could not believe, honestly, that this was June of 2019. This is over 5 years ago. I did this episode. I really am surprised. I thought maybe 2 at the most, but there it is, 5. And it was Radio Free Mormon number 84. It's called The Miracle Making of President Nelson. And the reason I called it that, I probably should have given it a better title. It might be more viewed or listened to. Hopefully it will be after tonight. But taking 3 examples of ordinary incidents that Russell Nelson took and then made and embellished into becoming miracle stories. So that's why I call it The Miracle Making of President Nelson. And it does help to view the incident at Mozambique in contrast and connection with the other 2 stories that I cover. These aren't the only miracle stories that he's manufactured over the years, but these are 3 really good examples. One of them has to do, of course, with the airplane spiral, the death spiral, right, over Delta, Utah, back in the 70s. I talked about that in there. I think we talked about that too in a Mormonism Live as well, didn't we, Bill?
Yeah, we talked about it. It started off with the plane story, which was before this, and then I think sort of an outgrowth of that was these other 3 stories, which sort of came to our attention, and then you did this deep dive into those 3 stories in this episode on the screen.
Yes. And so the other story had to do with the lady in the hat. And this has to do with a story that was going to be part of a book about him. And right before the book was going to be published, I think it was probably written by Sherry Dew, a biography. Or maybe it's a book he wrote about something else. Anyway, this story is in it, and it's about him, and he's telling it. And what happens is, this happens back in the 80s. It's a story that's miraculous. It's wonderful. It's faith-affirming. It didn't happen. And what happens is that they put it up, and I think it was on Latter Daily Digest or, the Meridian Magazine is what I'm thinking of. They put up an excerpt in advance of the publication of the books to whet people's appetite and get them pre-ordering this book. And this story, the one about the lady in the hat, the details I won't go into right now. You can listen to the episode if you want. But, oh my gosh.
I just happened to find this beside my desk. I thought I can do a visual aid.
You look like Judy Garland in Easter Parade.
I kind of do. Go ahead.
Okay. Or Ann Miller. But regardless, it didn't happen because this woman, her grown-up daughter and the grown-up granddaughter contacted Meridian Magazine and said, hey, we got to contact you because this didn't happen. I mean, the non-miraculous parts happened, but all the miraculous crap, that never happened, including the fact our mom never wore a hat at all. She just never wore one. So what happened was this happened and for good reason. But so they didn't have time to modify the story to make it actually fit the facts. Now, remember, this is a story that President Nelson had told himself, and he had elaborated upon it. Fortunately, people who were involved and knew the parties said that it didn't happen like that. So they just had to take the whole chapter out. They had to take the whole story out because it was right on the cusp of publication. And it went out with the story. But we found out about the story later on. So here we have the one about Rebecca, what am I talking about right now?
What are you talking about? You're talking about
Miracle Making of President Nelson.
You are, and you're talking about this death-defying moment that happened to him.
Oh, right, the gun.
The gun. How can we? I know there's so many stories. It's hard to keep them straight. There's a death spiral. There must be some kind of death incident with the hat lady too, a hat pin or something. I don't know. But now we've moved on to armed robbery. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we've got the gun to the head. Now, this starts off back in 2009, I believe it is. No, May 30th of 2009. It was shortly before this, because this is the first publication that we have about the story. And you can see it's right here. I had to go back in the Wayback Machine for KSL.com. The title of the story is LDS Church Apostle, his wife, and two other couples attacked in Mozambique. And if you can really squint, you can see the date there is May 30th, 2009. That's why I put it in a little bit bigger lettering. And here is the story. Now, if we can go off the screen and make that big enough for me to read, Bill, is that possible? Thank you so much. You can see there it says it's the archived news story by Carol, whatever, Makita. Armed assailants attacked and robbed a Latter-day Saint apostle, his wife, and two other couples in the African nation of Mozambique. Elder Russell and Nelson and his wife Wendy were on a church assignment when the incident happened. According to church spokesman Scott Trotter, the wife of the mission president, Blair Packard, suffered a broken arm. She and others also have cuts and bruises. So there's a picture of the Packards right there below it. And the story goes on. An official church statement says, on Friday evening, they were having dinner together in the mission president's home when armed assailants entered the home and robbed them. We don't have complete information yet, but we understand that Sister Packard's arm was broken. In addition, she and others suffered some superficial injuries, mainly cuts and bruises. Elder and Sister Nelson will continue their assignment over the weekend as planned. So we have the news story quoting from the official church statement about the incident. The country is located in the southeastern part of the African continent, blah, 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 on the Indian Ocean. Elder and Sister Nelson had traveled there for weekend meetings with church leaders there, which included Mozambique, Maputo. That was the name of the town I think they were in. Maputo mission president Blair Packard and his wife, Sister Cindy Packard, and Elder William and Sister Shanna Parmley of the African Southeast Area Presidency. So as usual, when you get an apostle and his wife traveling around, there's an Area 70 and his wife frequently who accompany them, and they are visiting the mission president and his wife in Maputo, Mozambique mission. So that's the 6 couples that are present having dinner on this evening in May of 2009 when something unexpected happens. By the way, there's a picture of Elder William and Sister Shanna Parmley. Those are the other couple that was present. Former missionaries to Mozambique, who we talked with Saturday, tell us that they were warned to always be cautious and told about the dangers of life in that African nation. And they're talking about more than just lions, I think. They're talking about people with machetes and robbers, which seems to be a real problem. And that's why they're warned about it. And that's even why they have guards who stand guard outside of the mission president's home. Former missionaries to Mozambique, who we talked with Saturday, tell us, oh, I'm sorry, I already read that part. Austin Hill served the Latter-day Saint mission in Mozambique in 2002 and 2003. He says the people are very friendly when they're not trying to rob you. Here's a quote from him. The mission home before the current one got broken into, and the church employed guards were there all day. One of the 3 guards they employed had orchestrated the whole thing. They need better guards. When you hear of something happening in the neighborhood as you're there, it's usually with a machete. That point is interesting because usually robbers have machetes. They're armed with machetes. We're going to find a difference in the story as it gets related over time in this instance. Another returned missionary from the area says the mission home was moved about 8 months ago to the neighborhood of Costa de Sol, which is fairly isolated. Hill, that's the returned missionary, returned to Mozambique and worked with the Packards after his mission. They are from Arizona and have an NGO for humanitarian work in that African nation. Hill says they are well known in Beira, which is another city where they do a lot of their work, but they're wonderful people. They're very kind. And the article concludes, we don't yet know what or how much was taken, but authorities in Maputo are investigating this crime. So that's the first story that breaks on May 30th, 2009 about this incident. Does anybody want to say anything before I go to the next story, which comes out 2 days later?
No, it seems pretty
Okay.
straightforward, and it doesn't really mention anything about anyone being targeted or any kind of weapon other than a possible machete. So that's interesting. First take is usually the most accurate unless they're trying to hide something.
Yeah, and we have one I would consider it a serious injury, a broken arm, which I think it ended up
Oh,
being an
yeah.
elbow, but that's the wife of the mission president
Yeah.
who ends up being the hero in the story,
I-
which we'll find out in the next
Yeah.
news release from 2 days later. I think it's June 2nd. Let's see. No, it's June 1st. So that was May 30th. And I think, yeah, May has 31 days in it, right? So this is 2 days later. And here it is, once again from the Wayback Machine, KSL.com, June 1st, 2009. Same reporter. As Latter-day Saint apostle, Elder Russell M. Nelson is shaking off a weekend attack and robbery by armed gunmen in Mozambique. He's telling missionaries this type of thing happens all over the world. During the attack, the mission president's wife suffered a broken arm. Others have cuts and bruises. KSL has now learned details of the incident from an email that the mission president sent to the families of missionaries serving in the area. So this ends up being what we would call, this is a statement that's made, it's contemporaneously made by people who are actually present to witness the event. So this statement becomes valuable as far as evidence goes. It's stronger evidence than like a church statement, which is being funneled through a church spokesperson in Utah. Here's what it says. President Blair and Sister Cindy Packard are assuring family and friends of about 70 missionaries that they feel what happened in the mission home in Maputo, Mozambique was, quote, an isolated armed robbery, and that they, quote, or that they will be, quote, reviewing all security and safety procedures. It goes on. Elder Russell M. Nelson and his wife, Wendy, were on church assignment in that African nation, having dinner with the area president, his wife, and the Packards. The incident happened. In a statement, the Packards said, 4 armed gunmen overpowered our one guard. We were threatened verbally and physically. Cindy, mission president's wife, was roughed up, but finally did get away to warn other guards and neighbors who came to our assistance. She suffered a fracture in her left elbow. And there are ellipses in this quotation. I wish I had the original. Other bruises and skin knees. Elder Nelson was accosted as well, but is fine with minimal injury. Doesn't say anything more about that. The Packards also wrote that they feel, quote, Elder and Sister Nelson were not specifically targeted. This is very important in this statement, okay? Elder and Sister Nelson were not specifically targeted, or that this was any act against the church. So it's not against them. It's not against the church. It's just a random robbery that fortunately ended up being thwarted by Cindy Packard. Some have speculated that our guards were involved, like the one before, and that the statement says they were not. They also wrote that their 9-year-old daughter, Lindy, their housekeeper, and her baby boy are safe. The 2 children hid in a closet. The Packards also said that in Maputo, quote, home invasions and armed confrontations are not common. We have had 1 missionary apartment burglarized in recent weeks, but have had no other incidents in over a year and a half. And of course, they're trying to persuade families back home that things aren't going crazy in Mozambique and that their missionary children are going to be safe. After the incident, Elder and Sister Nelson held meetings with all of the missionaries. The Packards described them as wonderful spiritual experiences. The Packards say area and church security personnel are examining all safety procedures. Elder and Sister Nelson left Mozambique Sunday afternoon and are on their way home to Utah. So there we get some more details about it. Once again, remember that comment about that the mission president says that Sister Nelson and Elder Nelson were not specifically targeted. Okay. The next time this comes up is 6 months later in November 14th, 2009. Sister Nelson, Wendy Nelson, is speaking, and she's speaking at a conference for women, and I believe it's in Utah. And we read about it in the Deseret News under that date, November 14th, 2009, headline, Mormon Apostle's wife felt comfort during attack. The wife of Elder Russell M. Nelson said she felt a comforting peace that helped her remain calm during an attack by armed robbers last spring. Sister Wendy Watson Nelson described the experience Friday during a speech to 3,300 women at the Time Out for Women event in Salt Lake City. The robbery occurred in May at an LDS mission home in Mozambique. Sister Nelson says, the 4 armed robbers had one intention: to harm my husband and to take me hostage. Now ask yourself the question, how would she know that? How would she know that their intent was to harm her husband and to take her hostage, especially to take her hostage part? All right. English is not the language of Mozambique. Portuguese is actually, apparently. And as it turns out later on, we find out that Wendy doesn't speak Portuguese. Russell Nelson doesn't speak Portuguese. Even the mission president doesn't speak Portuguese. Only the mission president's wife has any ability to speak in Portuguese. She's the only one who has the ability to understand anything said in Portuguese, apparently. But we'll go on with this. Sister Nelson described finishing taco salads with Mozambique, Maputo mission president Blair Packard and his wife and 2 other couples when hey, Bill, is there a way we can get us off the screen here? I got to read the language underneath. Thanks so much. When a stranger came in the door, Sister Nelson and Cindy Packard, the Mormon mission president's wife, identified the situation, announcing, this is a robber. I'm sorry. Sister Nelson said Cindy Packard identified the situation, announcing, this is a robbery to her guests, and eventually ran outside to shout for help in Portuguese, which only she, among the group, could speak. I don't know. It's just strange to me. I think they've been there for a year and a half. I think my mission president in Japan could speak Japanese okay, but maybe he'd been out longer. So I don't know.
Learn the word help, though. I mean, honestly, wouldn't that be part? I mean, 2 important things. Where is the bathroom, right?
Exactly.
El baño, really important. And help. Those 2 things.
I know. Let me just tell you something. This story makes no sense to me, and it will continue to make less and less sense as more and more details come forth or elaborated or are made up. I'm just going to say I've read thousands and thousands of pages of police reports in my lifetime. So, and this doesn't look like anything that really happened. So far, it's okay, but now it starts getting worse and worse as more and more details get added to the story. So, this is I'm sorry, what, Rebecca?
It's like the first vision.
It is kind of, yeah, good point. Eventually ran outside to shout for help in Portuguese, which only she among the group could speak. Could speak well. There is a period there. Sister Packard, and like you said, why do you have to speak it well to yell, help, help? Does anybody here know what Spanish is for help or Portuguese? I understand the related languages.
Is Spanish, but I don't know what Portuguese would be.
Yeah, how about just screaming?
Yeah.
Okay, so speak well. Sister Packard suffered cuts and bruises and a broken arm in the attack. Never does it say how that happened. Was she manhandled? Nobody says. Did she fall down as she was running outside or something? Maybe there's steps and she fell. Nobody ever says how it was she ended up with a broken arm. Sister Nelson said the attempted robbery and abduction was a sobering experience that confirms that life is a spook alley. But she takes comfort in the scriptures that advises the righteous to fear not what man can do. Her account of the attack helped illustrate several points, which itself might be a clue as to why these details are being added to the story, because they help illustrate several points which are germane to what it is she's talking about. She said the first of the 4 robbers didn't barge in, but sauntered casually, exactly like the adversary does. I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but the adversary actually, when he walks from place to place or comes into your house, he saunters casually. Sister Nelson said she had not previously understood the phrase, here I raise my Ebenezer in the hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Hey, Bill, you used to have that. That used to be like your theme song.
I used to use that song all the time.
I know, because they always said, here I raise my Ebenezer. And I went, what the heck is that?
If I remember right, it's a stone, if I'm not mistaken. Ebenezer. I'll look it up. You continue with the story and I'll have something.
She goes on with it. So she'll do your work for you.
Oh,
In
sweet.
the hymn, Come Thou Font of Every Blessing, before that night, little did we know before that evening, the Lord would pile up stones of help. So I think you're right. Pile up stones of help. Sister Nelson said, noting that the Bible dictionary, this is what we have to do now that Mormon doctrine's been taken off the shelves. We have to go to the Bible dictionary. Noting that the Bible dictionary defines an Ebenezer as a stone of help. Sister Nelson said she felt comforted just prior to the incident. Just prior to the incident, even before this guy comes sauntering in casually into the mission president's home, she feels this intense comfort. Presumably from the Lord, who, if he could send comfort, could also send like a warning, like you might want to get out of here right now before the robbers come in. That helped her keep calm during a tense time. She said, just before that man walked in, an intense, beautiful peace came upon me, she said. Another thing, it's not making any sense to me. If you're ever in a situation where you doubt God, just call me. I will tell you, I have felt that peace. Sister Nelson said, righteous women everywhere need to be as vigilant and bold as the mission president's wife. Now, I like this part because Wendy is highlighting the fact that even though she's so special that God gives her this feeling of peace before the robbers come in, it really was Cindy Packard, the mission president's wife, who's the hero here.
Can I say something very quickly? I just got a note from somebody who
Yes.
knows Cindy.
Is it Cindy?
And she said that her arm was broken and that she actually had to come back to the United States to get it, have surgery or have it taken care of. So it was a fairly substantial injury. So
if you got somebody on the horn who knows Cindy, I would like to ask her if any of those robbers had a gun and if they held it up to President Nelson's head.
Here's the thing.
The trigger. Yeah.
I also have some other information because people just send me things randomly. And if you give me 1 second, I will read this because it fits in, I think, right here.
Great.
So this person says, I have some insight on this. I have family that was serving as the medical directors for the southern part of Africa when the event happened. So we're going to hear what the medical directors of this mission said. They told us all about it the day that it happened. Okay. So this is an account on that day.
Mhm.
There was no gun pointing at someone's head, no faulty trigger. The attackers had no clue who the rich white people were in the house. One of the sisters was dragged out of the house by her hair. That's very,
One of
very
the
disturbing.
sisters? Does that mean
That's
one
what
of the
it
three
said.
women in the couples, or is there a sister missing?
That
one?
no, I think maybe they're talking about one of the sisters in that was there, one of the wives of one of the mission presidents or someone else. It wasn't Wendy. She would have talked about that. Dragged out of the house by her hair. Nothing of note happened to President Nelson or to Wendy. And this person makes the observation, what do the other people who were there part of that attack think when they hear President Nelson telling this version that has nothing to do with reality, if their version is correct? So anyway, interesting.
Thank you so much, because I was talking with a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir this afternoon and asking him the exact same question. I was asking it rhetorically as well. There are 6 people reported as being in the room when it happened. One of them is President Nelson. We know who the other 5 are. What do they think, if anything, when they hear him tell the story about the gun being put to his head by one of the robbers and the trigger pulled and it misfired?
And it's all about him in that story. It's not about the other people. It's about him. When in fact, we have a woman, whichever one it was, that underwent quite an experience and is the heroine of the whole scenario. And she's not mentioned.
Yep. I think that with President Nelson and also with Wendy, it's all about them. I think President Nelson, it's all about me. And with Wendy, it's all about him and me. It's about both of us together. We're a team.
Somebody's suggesting it was a temporary commandment gun, which we'll get to later as well.
Very good. Betty Crockett, 5.
Good
Awesome.
segue.
I'm feeling a little bit hoarse here. I'm sounding a little bit like Brad Wilcox yesterday afternoon, but I'll try and keep going here,
Yeah,
okay?
you'd have to be kind of foaming a little bit if you were doing that and chomping at the,
I got to smile like Bongo from the Banana Splits.
You've got better teeth
Really?
than Brad Wilcox, yes.
If you're ever in a situation where we already said that. Sister Nelson said, righteous women everywhere need to be as vigilant and bold as the mission president's wife. Remember, this is 2009, same year, 6 months later. We therefore as women, she goes on, we therefore as women need to be hyper vigilant and about what's coming into our homes on the internet, the computer, and the TV. and the front door, apparently. Back to the mission president's wife. She labeled the problem, and the second thing she did was to free herself and get out. Now, there's an indication that she was being restrained in some way. You know, these are the kind of police reports that drive me crazy. And if I were to get a police report like this as a prosecutor and asked to file charges, I'd say, you need to go back and ask these like 50 questions in order to flesh this thing out so I know what the heck's going on.
Well, could she have been restrained and somebody was kind of pulling her hair and taking her outside and she wiggled free and ran out the door? It could be, or we could be talking about two separate people.
Well, free herself and get out are listed as apparently two different things, but I don't know. She brought the hideous situation to a close, Sister Nelson said. We need to be like her. I like that. And get over it, i.e. being slow to take action. We need to get over being slow to take action. Our spiritual strength of the past won't be enough in the future. We need to increase the intensity of our prayers and of our scripture study. Apparently our self-defense classes. Okay, so that's the end of that story from November of 2009. Now we go forward 5 years, September 14th of 2014. And now President Nelson wants to get in the act because he's tired of Wendy getting all the attention on this story. And he says this is September 14th, 2014. I am trying to read this bottom part. This ends up getting put in a book as well. If we can take can we put us up at the top, Bill? I should know how to do this. I apologize.
I can't. It won't let me do that. I can't put us at the top, but I can put us off to the side with it being small, or I can put us at the bottom.
Oh, that's good. That's fine. Side's good.
Okay, cool.
That's big enough. Heavenly Messengers was the name of his talk that he gave to a 153 stake conference meeting, whatever you call it, with 153 stakes, broadcast, Wasatch and Utah County Conference broadcast on September 14th, 2014. And this language gets included in the book as well. Here's the quote. On one occasion, we were attacked by armed men with malicious intent. They announced their purpose to kidnap her and to kill me. After they maliciously molested us in those evil objectives, apparently, details here are not important for this, just somewhat flowery and purple prose descriptions. They became totally foiled, totally. A gun to my head failed to fire. And my wife was suddenly released from their hideous grasp. No explanations at all. Then they disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. We were mercifully rescued from potential disaster. And the moral is, we know we were protected by angels round about us. So there's so many questions that are raised by this, and I've just got to mention a couple. We already talked about the Portuguese language and how is it that they know what the heck they're saying. Why would they say it? In thousands of pages and hundreds of cases that I've reviewed, I've got to tell you, both as a defense attorney and as a prosecutor, I'm not sure I can ever recall hearing about people coming into a house who are there to burglarize or do something bad, who announce their objectives at the outset to their victims. It seems difficult to believe. And yet, what I think is going on is that Wendy and later President Nelson, in order to tell the story, they have to know that that's what they were going to do. And how are they going to know that unless they announced it beforehand? So I sort of think that that's the way it works. We have to have a certain effect. And therefore, in order to have this effect and our knowledge be complete about what they were going to do, we have to make up this crazy story that leads up to it. The other thing is this. If there's 4 guys and they're armed and one of them has a gun, by the way, huge thing that you just read, nobody had a gun. This did not happen. According to the mission president and his wife, when they reported for medical care shortly after this actually happened. Did not happen. But the fact it did not happen is underscored by how ridiculous it is. If there's 4 guys in a house and they've got these people there and they want to kill Russell Nelson, and all they're going to do is take a gun, put it to his head and pull it once and it misfires, oh, I guess we'll leave. Let me tell you, if I'm going to kill somebody, I'm going to pull the trigger a few more times and see if I can get some action going. Okay? Anybody would.
It
And the
sounds
other
like
thing is,
bad TV, don't you think? Like maybe they've seen a robbery on TV and they're like, the robbers burst in and they say, we're going to get you all. And it does. It sounds like it's
it's
scripted.
melodrama.
Yeah, a melodrama. That's exactly right.
They pull the trigger, it doesn't go off, and they run away. They that's it. They've given up. The one shot they were going to fire didn't work, and they leave the scene as quickly as they came.
Right. And there's no indication as to why it is that they release Wendy. I have no idea. Nobody has any idea. I think the implication is we're supposed to figure out that God was involved in some way. And Songs of Our Town say that they were lazy robbers and lax molesters. I changed it a little bit from the way you wrote it. I think it's great, though. Lazy robbers and lax molesters. It was a good thing for them. So we've got confirmation now that this story never happened. And what happens is, we have President Nelson, who's physically present and giving a story that's pre-recorded in General Conference. And this is a man that everybody has just sustained the preceding day, Saturday morning, as a prophet, seer, and revelator, who's up there telling a story that's made up, that never happened, that features him as the one who is the beneficiary of God's protection, and Wendy too.
Do you think that the others involved in the incident had to sign an NDA so that they could use the story? Or do you think they were just church broke enough that they're like, you know what, if he wants to use it that way, it's fine. And I do know there's a phenomenon as you get older where you tell a story and it really doesn't even take telling it too many times, maybe 3, 4, and you really do believe it happened. You really do. So I was reading an interesting study about that.
Yeah, it's in the DSM-5.
Even to the point where you say it enough times and even other people who were part of the experience begin to believe it the way you tell it. In fact, RFM can attest to this, but in the legal profession, if witnesses have been around each other, it deeply hurts their testimony if they're testifying of certain facts. Like you want to separate them as quick as possible and get their stories separately. And the fact that the early stories don't talk about it, and then months later, suddenly these details, which would have made a fantastic news story in the beginning, by the way, who wouldn't want to tell in the Deseret News that this happened? But the story seems to have its detail change months later when Wendy and Rusty decide they want to take part in telling the story on their behalf for their benefit.
Right. So for whatever reason, and I can't speak to a state of mind whether he believes this at this point, but it does appear that it never happened as far as the gun and everything. They've taken an incident that was probably shocking, mildly traumatic. It was a good thing that they got out of there okay, and only one person had a broken arm. All that's good. But what's not good is to take that and use that as a launching pad for a faith-promoting story about how angels were protecting you, and proving that by having a gun misfire. Okay. October 6, 2024. I thought we were done with this back in 2014, but 10 years later, President Nelson brushes it off, brings it out in General Conference. And only if you know the pedigree of this story can you appreciate how strange it is that he brings it up here in General Conference. And he doesn't tell the story. He just tells us one incident from the story, the one incident that almost certainly never happened, that he made up, and that he wants to tell people in order to show them that God preserved him to be a prophet, to lead the church in these last days and build all these freaking temples. Now, that goes back to the same video that I played before. And it's short enough, and I thought it might be helpful just to replay this so that with the context of how the story's developed, maybe we can see this again with new eyes.
Later, I married my...
Is it that one? I don't think it was that one. Let me go back to, I can just go back to the very beginning where it played because I don't.
No, that was the right one. He starts
Is
out
it?
by talking about Wendy. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. View slideshow. Here we go.
Later, I married my beloved wife, Wendy. She was a central part of my second example. When Wendy and I were on an assignment in a distant land, armed robbers put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger. But the gun didn't fire. Throughout that experience, both of our lives were threatened. Yet Wendy and I felt an undeniable peace. It was the peace which passeth all understanding. Brothers and sisters, the Lord will comfort you too. He will strengthen you. He will bless you with peace, even amidst chaos.
All right, the last thing that I want to do is I want to go back to the last screen. Let me do this, okay? Because I think I just noticed something. I was trying to move it back to the last slide. I can't seem to do that from here. Yep, as I thought. Okay, so there is something different in this story. And the different thing is that now, if you look at this prior, the first time that Elder Nelson is on record, to my knowledge, telling the story, he doesn't mention anything about feeling peace. That's been Wendy's gig. That's what she brought up in the November 2009 recitation of the story, that she felt this peace that started even before the robbers came in. President Nelson doesn't mention it here. In 2014, he mentions the gun to the head, but not the peace. And now he gives an abbreviated form yesterday, October 6, 2024 General Conference. He gives the abbreviated form, and he includes the gun to the head that misfires and adopts Wendy's account about the peace. So now it's not just Wendy who felt the peace. Wendy's not going to be feeling any peace if he's not feeling any peace, let me tell you. So he felt peace too, along with Wendy. And that was kind of like the peace that he felt when the plane was spiraling toward the fields in Delta, Utah, with one wing on fire and apparently both engines out. So peace is really important, and he wants to have his share as well. So I see that as an additional detail that he is now adding to the story and making it part of his own story too, although Wendy apparently started that about 10 years ago. Any thoughts? Because that's the end of this story about General Conference.
Don't you think, and Landon made a good point in the chat, because I'm always got one eye on the chat, that people try to retrofit peace or a gospel lesson or something that makes something important into any experience. I mean, I bring up the unfortunate story of Bonnie Cordon, right? A horrific incident, yet after the fact, retrofitted to be a peaceful, special, blessed experience, right? And so I think this is the case here. Something happened. You kind of look at it with those eyes. How can I use this? I don't want to be cynical, but I feel like they kind of do that. How can I use this? How can I embellish this? The other thing I would say is I know he wishes that there were some atheists at the dinner, because he loves to tell the stories where the faithful felt peace, but the atheists were running and screaming and they had no sense of comfort whatsoever. So I'm guessing that he wishes there were some atheists there at dinner, that he could make that point also.
Well, Cindy Packard appears to be the only one running and screaming, and she's the one who saved the day.
Yep, she sure was.
If this was just a one and done story, I could maybe go like, all right, maybe they just didn't want to scare the parents of the missionaries who were serving, so they left that detail out.
Yes.
Which, by the way, if the church wants to claim that, it would be its own problem, which is you not telling the world the truth of the danger that your members' children are in, while allowing the president of the church to use the exact same story to set an example and help people feel good feelings in conference, right? So that's unhealthy on its own. But the red hat story was so bad that they had to pull the book off the shelves and correct it, screwing up thousands of copies, and that had to just go in the dumpster, and republish the book without that section in it because he had misled the reader about what had happened in that experience. Then you have the plane story where he talks about this flight of death. The plane explodes, the wings on fire. It's precarious. Women are screaming and crying all around. And he, it's this miraculous thing where, again, he feels peace, by the way. And that story, the flight report actually does come into the public view, and it is apparent that the dangers were much less significant. It was just had a small issue. It would be inappropriate to continue the flight in the safety of the plane and the crew. We're going to take a precaution here and land in an airport at Delta, not a field in Delta necessarily, but an actual airport in Delta. And then you've got the November 2015, which was the fourth one you covered in all of that. And both the Revelation 4 and the Revelation taking it away were both done because of God and God's love. And yet the details of that story also suggest it did not happen the way Nelson and others said it did. And so what you end up with is the president of the church having 4 stories where it is clearly more rational, more on the critic side that these stories did not happen, that they are embellished. And one thing he does do, he does pick a story that has a nugget of truth to it. And then he just seems to embellish it beyond all recognition to the point where anybody with some common sense or knows the background can see right through it. It is a strange thing to claim that you are the trusted source who teaches truth when you are maybe the best example of a lying leader in the modern day, with maybe the exception of Elder Jeffrey R. Holland.
Well, we certainly got receipts on all of this. And it is a strange thing because, of course, at BYU said prophets teach the truth. That's what we do, even though he knows he doesn't. And in conference itself, he asked the rhetorical question, people ask, why are we building so many temples? And his answer is because God told us to.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we supposed to believe that?
Yeah.
His credibility is shot.
One other little thing I want to mention, when he reads it there, and again, he's at the end of his life, just like prophets, President Monson, Ezra Taft Benson, they're sometimes in way worse health than the church would like to present them. But when he reads that talk, he doesn't seem to know that story himself. He seems to have to keep looking down and not sort of surprised, like almost like a grandfather reading his grandchildren a bedtime story, where he looks and then acts it out in inflection, but he has to keep looking down, and he sort of is surprised himself about where the story's going. I found
my
that
impression was it almost sounded like he didn't believe it himself.
Yeah.
I only wish he would have said, when did that happen? Would that have been great?
Where was that?
Good thing it was pre-recorded, huh?
Exactly. My question is, the strengthening the church members committee, we know that they watch, I'm assuming probably 4 or 5 are assigned to you guys, right? With everything that you do. Isn't there a list where they say this story has kind of been covered and debunked? I mean, isn't there a list somewhere that they let people know, please don't tell this again, because a lot of people are aware that it's not what it seems.
We know if enough people have a fuss about it, stories like this can be retracted, such as the instance with Elder Holland and the Rottweilers or the Doberman Pinschers with the brother meeting his older brother on a mission.
Right.
Yep. And he actually put out a retraction apology, I think in like either the Tribune
apology.
Not apology. He
didn't put out a retraction.
A mistake.
I'm sorry. We covered this thoroughly back in the summer of 2017 when the story first surfaced by Elder Holland telling it to the mission president's training at the MTC. But the retraction was not by him. It was by a church spokesperson who made all sorts of excuses for him and why it was that these kinds of things happen.
Yeah. Well, I know that they want to put forward the best story and the story that fits the narrative. We have tons of examples of that. And it makes you wonder all the stories that they've ever told, pre-internet age, pre-fact checking. It really makes you wonder about every single thing you've ever heard, right? If it sounds too good to be true, I'm sure it probably is. I'm
just going to say it again. I said about Paul H. Dunn, where he got caught making up stories that are divine and miraculous and that he saves him. When you are a leader in a church that is based upon a young man telling all sorts of stories about how God intervened in his life over and over again with angels and all sorts of things, you don't want to be out there and get caught telling stories about miraculous things that didn't happen, because people might start putting 2 and 2 together and say, if you're going to do it, Paul H. Dunn, or if you're going to do it, President Nelson, why am I to think that Joseph Smith didn't do exactly the same thing?
Yeah, that's true. And one tactic I've noticed that Brad Wilcox likes to use is studies have shown, right? And Nemo has done some great little shorts on that. The one that makes me the most mad is another airplane that's crashing, or is it the bus? It's some kind of vehicle crash. And when the bus or the airplane crashes, the faithful person helps others. Studies show that the atheists stomp on everybody's head. They kick everybody away to save themselves. Yeah. I remember Nemo going, what studies? If you're going to make a claim like that, what studies? So, but again, if it fits your narrative, if it is what you want to hear, it gives you those goosebumps, where the rest of us are like, what studies? Yeah, come on.
Good point.
It is a good point. It's interesting. Well, thank you for covering that. Is there anything else on that story? I just can't believe that you have to cover it again. I'm going to make a bet here that maybe 3 or 4 years from now, we're going to have to cover it again. I'm not kidding.
Well, maybe I'll go with the lady in the hat. Maybe he's got a lot of
I'll keep my hat close. Maybe we'll need to tell the story again. So yeah, and I hope that we can link that episode of your episode where you covered the 3 stories in the show notes, because I think everybody should go back and listen to that from a year ago. It was really interesting with the airplane and with the lady in the hat and the story that we covered here. So
if I'm going to be honest, and it's so seldom, so I'll give it a crack, that I went back, I found that because I knew I had done a story about it. Once again, I was surprised it was 5 years ago. I fast forwarded through the other ones and I got to this one because I just needed to listen to this one. It was about 10 minutes long. It's toward the end. It's around 37 minutes to 47. It's about 50 minutes long. It's just the audio. And I listened to it and I thought, damn, I did a good job with that.
Did.
Damn, I'm good.
That's better than tonight. I got to edit that one, see.
You said honest.
Thank you for sharing.
You said honest, which you rarely are, but you're more honest than they know how to be.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I don't have something that I consider to be above me that I am charged with representing in a positive light, regardless of what the truth is.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, one story down. Let's continue. Like I said, we pulled out, some of our favorite things. Again, so many other wonderful podcasters have covered all kinds of things about conference. But I picked out a couple stories that we'll go into, not as in depth as what RFM just did. But the first, and I didn't watch, I kind of hit and miss off and on watch conference. I had other stuff going on. And to me, that's a good thing, because in past years, I've had to dig in, watch everything. And this year I was just kind of in, but not of conference. It was one of those. But the one thing I did notice when I tuned in is that, again, it looks very much like a salad bar behind all of them. Very few actual bright colored flowers. And it looks just like a lettuce and a bunch of lettuce and greens. So, of course, I had to make this wonderful meme about the salad bar. So you'll see that my presentation is based mostly on the memes that I made over the weekend.
It looks like the expiration date is gone on those vegetables too.
I would think so. So as Bill alluded to, one of the big stories that everybody's talking about this weekend is this talk by Elder Oaks. And I made this meme, A New Way to Erase the Past. And it's called A Temporary Commandment. Temporary commandments. This is just crazy. I couldn't even believe this when I was hearing about this. So let's watch this clip really quick and it'll give you a sense of what we're going to discuss. Elder Oaks.
Us. The Lord's commandments are of 2 types: permanent, like the doctrine of Christ, and temporary. Temporary commandments are those necessary for the needs of the Lord's church or the faithful in temporary circumstances, but to be set aside when the need has passed. An example of temporary commandments are the Lord's directions to the early leadership of the church to move the saints from New York to Ohio, to Missouri, to Illinois, and finally to lead the pioneer exodus to the Intermountain West. Though only temporary, when still in force, these commandments were given to be obeyed. Some permanent commandments have taken considerable time to be generally observed. For example, President Lorenzo Snow's famous sermon on the law of tithing emphasized a commandment given earlier, but not yet generally observed by church members. It needed re-emphasis in the circumstances then faced by the church and its members. Recent examples of re-emphases have also been needed because of current circumstances faced by the Latter-day Saints or the church. These include the proclamation on the family issued by President Gordon B. Hinckley a generation ago, and President Russell M. Nelson's recent call for the church to be known by its revealed name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter.
Okay, let's just go through some of these. Let's pull the slide back up because I'm telling you, this is very strange. And I think we all could kind of see what this was and what this is laying the groundwork for. So, of course, I had to make a meme, keep the temporary commandments. I think you can all hear that playing in your head as a former primary pianist, keep the temporary commandments, right? Let's take a minute and sing that. Is that what we sang? No, I'm sorry, it's not. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Keep the temporary commandments. So let's just kind of go through very briefly what examples President Oaks gave. So first of all, he said a temporary commandment was the Lord commanding the saints go to New York, go to Ohio, go to Missouri, go to Illinois, go to Utah. I don't think the Lord commanded them to do that. I think it was basically, we got to get the hell out of here, right? I mean, look at the circumstances by which the saints had to leave. You've got counterfeiting, horse thievery, bank failure. You've got the Danites. You've got the Missouri War. You've got polygamy ripping the fabric of society in every town they go to. So the idea that the Lord commanded them to move from town to town was something different I had never heard. Had you guys ever heard it put that way?
No, I have not. Now, certainly, I expected him to go immediately to Noah's Ark, right?
Yeah.
Because I've heard that before. And
Yeah.
I think it was Ezra Taft Benson at some point who mentioned that in terms of, he used Noah and the ark as an example of why we listen to the living prophets and not
That's
the
right.
dead prophets.
We don't make an ark today. That's right. The
Yes.
Lord commanded Noah to, now I'm singing again, to go and build an ark. Da, da, da. I'm losing it here. But you're right. So this idea is the temporary commandment. This is the one idea that he throws out there of a temporary commandment.
And that shocked me because of Missouri.
Exactly. Because they're still making it up. So let's go on and let's talk about what some of the permanent commandments are. Tithing, okay? Well, that's a little problematic right there because of this quote that we have from Joseph F. Smith that says, we expect to see the day when we will all not have to ask you for $1 of donation for any purpose except for that which you volunteered to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needed. So again, if it's a permanent commandment, Joseph F. Smith didn't get that message because he's saying we're paying tithing now, but hopefully someday we won't have to again. So my brain was kind of trying to reconcile those two things. An example of a permanent commandment of tithing. Again, a strange example, I thought, because we have proof that at least some of the prophets thought it was supposed to be something temporary.
But it is important for Elder Oaks to emphasize that tithing is a permanent commandment.
Of course. Oh, no. For those of us that, think that might go away or it might change or it might be on a sliding scale or something. Yeah, it's not going to happen. That's the number one thing. You still got to pay. That's right. So then he went into a category which is called always been permanent, always been there, but needs a re-emphasis now. So that's kind of an interesting category. And one of the examples that he threw out was the proclamation to the family. This has always been the way it is. This has always been permanent, but now in our day, it needs to be re-emphasized and certainly not seen as something temporary. So again, I look at this, says gender is an essential characteristic of individual pre-mortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. So he's saying this is not temporary. This idea is permanent with re-emphasis. But again, that reminded me of last conference and this talk by President Nelson, which Nemo has kind of got into here. If you want to play this, very strange.
Did Russell M. Nelson just confirm a long-lost LDS doctrine that came from the days of Joseph Fielding Smith?
Your choices today will determine 3 things: where you will live throughout all eternity, the kind of body with which you will be resurrected, and those with whom you will live forever. If we unwisely choose to live telestial laws now, we are choosing to be resurrected with a telestial body.
Okay, hold up. Russell M. Nelson has just resurrected the telestial Kendall doctrine that those who go to the telestial kingdom do not have reproductive organs. Not only is this in direct contradiction to Alma 40:23, every limb and joint shall be restored to its body, yea, even a hair of the head shall not be lost, but all things shall be restored to their proper and perfect frame. It's also just plain weird. I'm confident that this is what he was referring to when he said
a telestial body.
But let me know what you think.
Anyway, I thought that was great because here you have the permanent commandment of the proclamation of the family. Gender is eternal. Yet just last year, President Nelson himself said, those who aren't righteous here in the terrestrial kingdom will be resurrected with a body without distinguishing genitalia of gender. So I don't understand. What do you think about that?
So I'm sorry, my brain is in like 7 places. Here's the first one.
No, I know.
Permanent law of tithing. You pointed out one great reason for why that's a problem. Also, when is it Lorenzo Snow when he goes to St. George?
Yeah, windows of heaven.
And the exact quote is the people are obligated to pay tithing who has means.
Yep.
Also, we've done several episodes between me and RFM talking about how tithing used to be done on increase or surplus and suddenly now it's gross. Tithing hasn't been a consistent commandment, whether it was an obligation, who has means, or whether it was a certain mode in which it should be paid. And so that's a problem. Number 2, when he talks about temporary commandments, somebody pointed out perfect opportunity to mention polygamy.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that. He does this strange thing with places.
Yeah.
And then I just find knowing God has revealed that those who go to the lower 2 kingdoms will have the TK smoothie, but he allows 15 prophets, seers, and revelators over 75 years, actually more than that, about 115 years of time to be misled, thinking that people of color were less valiant and cursed in the pre-earth life when they weren't. If that's the kind of God we're dealing with, he's like, look, I'm not going to straighten out the race thing, but I've got something to tell you about this TK smoothie. This is big deal. The moment you realize what God covers and what he doesn't cover in Mormonism, what he's responsible for and what he's not responsible for, what he chose to share and what he didn't choose to share, again, Mormonism becomes absolutely absurd when you start to consider those things.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely perfect. Let's move forward. We have a couple more things that you also mentioned too, which is great. So also in the proclamation to the family, and you mentioned this, it says, let's get back to the slides. There you go. Okay. So again, it says, we, the first presidency and the council of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, solemnly proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for eternal destiny of his children. So again, like you mentioned, polygamy. He did not mention polygamy. This is a permanent commandment, a permanent with re-emphasis or not. I don't know what they're trying to say. They really didn't mention it. And I question why. I think it's because, let's see, am I out of order here? Yep, I think I'm missing a slide. I had a slide of a picture of both President Nelson and President Oaks with their 2 wives. They are technically polygamous. So strange example. The other example he brought up was permanent re-emphasis was Mormon is a victory for Satan. The name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and don't forget it. And that was another thing that he said. And this just seems ridiculous. It's completely, there it is. You found it. Thank you. My slides were out of order. Why didn't he mention polygamy? There you go. Yep. So again, the things that he chose to use as an example just left me completely puzzled. So the name of the church has always been permanent, but needs re-emphasis. So is this true? Is this right? So we have 1829 to 34. It was called the Church of Christ. You know this. This is in the Book of Mormon. Later, 1834, 1838, we've got the Church of the Latter-day Saints. No hyphen, no small letter. Then we've got the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 1838, and the modern format, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter hyphen small d day Saints. So that doesn't sound very permanent to me. And then I go over on the church's social media, and here they're starting to call themselves just Church of Jesus Christ. So if this is a permanent commandment with re-emphasis, there sure is a lot of wiggle room I'm finding here. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that, did you know that if you Google thechurchofjesuschrist.org, the church's website doesn't come up? That belongs to the Bickertonites. They own that URL. They have forever. This is their webpage here. They are the Church of Jesus Christ of JesusChrist.org. The LDS Church is simply churchofjesuschrist.org. They don't own the. Just like, let's see. Gosh, my slides are out of order. I'm trying to find my Strangite slide. If you can find that, Bill. The name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with no hyphen and capital D. Oh, there it is. That's right. That belongs to the Strangites right there. So again, this idea, is it a permanent commandment with re-emphasis? Is it something temporary? It just seems like there's a lot of wiggle room and they don't really know what they're saying. So I thought it was really odd. Let's see. For some reason now, there we go. Okay. So I started thinking,
Were you done with that point?
No, you can make another point around it if you want. I was going to get to my...
The thing that's brought to my mind when I was going through your slides earlier before the show that had not occurred to me for some reason is that we know the history and we know that President Nelson is really, really focused on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you say Mormon Church is a victory for Satan, because that entire name was given by the Lord in a revelation in 1838. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. And yet, I was sort of thinking... up to this point, up to today, I was thinking, well, we hate it when the press or anybody leaves Jesus out of it and just says the Church of the Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
And I understand it because it's so dang long, but it's still kind of upsetting, right? Because that's really important. So the Church of Jesus Christ, if you leave off the of Latter-day Saints, okay, that's dispensable. We don't have to have that because we got the most important part in there, as we have in the URL, the name of the church and all these other different things. And it's referred to frequently in conference and other places. It's abbreviated to the Church of Jesus Christ without the of Latter-day Saints. Well, what occurred to me as I'm going through your slides is, let's not be hypocritical about this, okay, President Nelson? If God said the name of the church and by which it shall be called is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you have no more right to drop the of Latter-day Saints from the title than you have to drop the Jesus Christ.
Yep, no, that's exactly right. And that's what this list shows. And all of these revelations, all of these are in the scriptures, all of these were used. Now, I know they have said, there were so many churches of Christ, they had to change it. Not true. They had to change it to escape their debtors that were after the church, right? Let's just have a new name. They'll never find us if we're the Church of the Latter Day. And I do like the fact that often news sources, everybody makes that mistake and they call it the Church of the Latter Day. They take Jesus right out of it. So again, to call that something permanent, there's so much evidence that it was never meant to be permanent and never was permanent in the way that they were using it. Also, the word Mormon, a victory for Satan, that's absolutely ridiculous. We have Meet the Mormons, the film that was released in 2015. And not only that, it was shown at visitor centers and other church sites all over. We have the I'm a Mormon campaign. These are in recent history. These are in the last 10 years or so. So the idea that it's been permanent, if it was permanent, then all of these campaigns are against God's wishes and will. So it's very confusing.
Can I bring up another point?
Yeah, please do.
President Nelson is unique among prophets in the LDS tradition, as far as I know, in teaching us with clarity that prior prophets can be so easily deceived by Satan.
Yep, that's it. He's thrown every prophet under the bus for this. So
if President Hinckley can be so easily deceived by Satan, why is President Nelson immune?
Yep, that's exactly right. So, and we can kind of joke about this or see how absurd it is, but I think there's a higher purpose for this idea of temporary commandments. And in talking to different people, I came up with this list where, number one, a temporary commandment is for a certain era and certain people. So you don't really need to explain it. Why in my era did I have to take out one of my piercings in my ear? We can't tell you why. That's what God wanted for you, especially during that era. And it was not for you to question. You only needed to have one earring. Why does somebody today get to have two? Not for you to ask. That was a temporary commandment for you and your age. It's a way to sweep it under the carpet. Another thought is a temporary commandment can't be judged by present context. That was then. That's the same kind of thing. We can understand why the priesthood ban, right? A different age, a different day. It was temporary. It was fixed. It's fine. What's wrong with that, right? So easy to explain it all away. Also, a temporary commandment encourages one to hold on longer, even if something seems reprehensible. And I think about my co-host on Mormonish, Landon, who was very upset about November 15th. He was very upset about the 2015 policy, and he was starting to gravitate out of the church, but he was still in, and he went to his bishop and had like a several hour long conversation about that policy. And the bishop defended it. I know it's hard to understand, but this is what God wants. This is it. This is that. 3 days later, that was a Sunday, Wednesday, it was overturned and everything's just fine, right? Just hold on a little longer. If you don't understand something or don't like it, chances are it'll change. Maybe it was a temporary commandment. So I see it as a way to make people gaslight themselves into staying in the boat a little bit longer. Another idea I had is a temporary commandment allows the church to blame God, right? Not the leaders. And again, that's like the priesthood ban. President Oaks at the B1 celebration. We don't know why. We don't know why it was God. It was temporary. And then he lifted it. Isn't that great? I mean, to me, Mormon God is like Zeus, just playing with people, right? Ooh, I'm going to zap you with lightning. Ooh, I'm going to get you. Oh, I'm going to tease you here. I'm going to give you this policy. I'm going to take away one of your earrings. Oh, I'm going to do all that. Isn't this fun? It's no way to live your life with that kind of a higher power in your life. And lastly, a temporary commandment, let's see, can I read that? Oh, allows the church to pivot quickly with little explanation. Now that could be a good thing. Maybe they'll make some changes that we're all like, oh my gosh, I never thought that would happen. But not necessarily. So any final thoughts on temporary commandments before we move on from this segment? I just thought this was fascinating. Whoever's coming up with this, brilliant. I have to say, brilliant.
I sort of understand part of it. Like, again, I don't believe there was a Nephi and he was literally commanded to cut off Laban's head. But in Mormonism, you have these moments where there's an exception to the rule or we have to do something different. And you can even pick apart like Jesus's time where for someone to be healed, they have to cover themselves in ash or sackcloth or whatever. Like there might be a specific rule for a specific person at a specific time. That can sort of make sense to me. But and he doesn't use temporary commandments sort of to justify all of these things. But it seems like this move that will allow future generations to use it this way. And for anybody who's a believer or an apologist out there who says that's not the way he used it, you guys are making more out of this than what's there. Maybe let's just wait and see if this is a form of rhetoric that's used at the local or general level in order to excuse mistakes from the past and to justify like, oh, well, like you pointed out, Rebecca, there was a time and a place for that. It's just not today.
Yeah. For no reason, completely arbitrary.
And apparently any commandments that we have today, which we think are permanent, are subject to being revised to temporary on a whim.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Which some things are good, like you said. I don't think he means it that way. Yeah. I think he's meaning the things he's not talking about. I think he means polygamy, which is obviously a classic example of a temporary commandment. Or is it? Because here's a guy who's married to a second eternal wife, Kristen. And I guess he'd have to explain to her if he put polygamy on the list of temporary commandments, as well as other people. And the obvious one, which came to me as you were speaking, which is the priesthood and temple ban from 1852 to 1978. Obviously temporary. And we know he thinks it's a commandment because we know he thinks it's from God because he said so in that B1 celebration back in 2018.
Except what the audience wouldn't know in such a story, well, our audience would, but a general audience, is that Brigham Young, by his prophecies, essentially said it's a permanent commandment until the very end of the plan of salvation, working itself out past the millennium until we get to the very end. And every spirit child of God that's Caucasian gets the access to these things. Then and only then can these folks get it. So like polygamy, celestial marriage was required. We showed that. Like the priesthood and temple ban, where Brigham Young says, sorry about your luck, but this is permanent. All of these things are sort of able to be massaged in the modern day so that the modern day member doesn't have a clue that in the past these things were taught completely the opposite of the way that you're taught the idea today.
Yeah. And it also gives the modern member a way when somebody says, look, it wasn't that way when I was growing up. I wasn't taught that. This was very different. They can say, well, that was a temporary commandment. Just kind of dismiss whatever your point of view might be. It's a really good tool, I think. So, and of course, we can't forget this quote where it says, this is Elder Tom Perry, the world changes constantly and dramatically, but God, his commandments and promised blessings do not change. They are immutable and unchanging. That was a temporary statement.
Until they're not.
Yep. That's it. We don't know. All right. So that was another big thing. The other thing that everybody's talking about, which I found to be completely irresponsible, always have, but they really did it to death at this conference. And I made this meme. It says, when members are leaving and church leaders feel they are losing their grasp, the answer is to dial up the second coming is near rhetoric. This has been the case since the early days of the church. And this is what they did at this conference. There was a lot of it. Let's listen to President Nelson for a minute.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
My dear brothers and sisters, in the coming day, Jesus Christ will return to the earth as the millennial Messiah. So today I call upon you to rededicate your lives to Jesus Christ. I call upon you to help gather scattered Israel and to prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. I call upon you to talk of Christ, testify of Christ, have faith in Christ, and rejoice in Christ. Come unto Christ and offer your whole soul to him. This is the secret of life of joy. The best is yet to come, my dear brothers and sisters, because the Savior is coming again. The best is yet to come because the Lord is hastening his work. The best is yet to come as we fully turn our hearts and our lives to Jesus Christ. I bear my solemn witness that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I am his disciple. I'm honored to be his servant. At his second coming, the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. That day will be filled with joy for the righteous.
All right. I think that's good enough.
We should keep.
Perfect. All right. He just kept mentioning it over and over. The second coming is coming. Let's go to the slides. And I knew as soon as he started talking about that, I knew that if I went over into social media, this is what I would see. Scaring people, witless since 1830. And this is from a faithful site. And again, this makes me mad for people. Somebody wrote, I am quite scared, right? This is talking about the conference talks. They're asking, has anybody heard this being mentioned so much? I'm quite scared, said one person. Has anybody seen a rainbow recently? Somebody said. This is faithful sites. It's going to be very soon. Even at our doorstep, we are in the 11th hour. He just said what all the other prophets of this dispensation have said. It will be soon. It has been announced to be soon for over 2,000 years. So it's got to be soon now, right? It's closer than it's ever been. And now it's even closer. And now it's even closer. This is unprecedented to have this much emphasis on the second coming, somebody says. Yes. And then we're going to go on to talk about Stevenson. Elder Stevenson also made some prophetic announcements. Don't be scared. It will be a joyous and beautiful transition. So again, they're really dialing up this rhetoric and people are taking note and they're getting nervous. So here's one that really made me sad. Somebody said, did President Nelson just say the second coming will be soon? How soon do we think it will be? I know I shouldn't be, but I'm quite scared, right? this kind of stuff this really makes me upset. Somebody answered this person and said, Christ may come to earth tomorrow, or we could get hit by a bus and go to him tomorrow. Either way, it's a win-win, right? We never know when either will happen. So it's good to always be ready. And this person said they didn't kind of get that takeaway from the talk, but a lot of others did. And then the person said, thank you. This makes me feel better. I have really bad anxiety, specifically about the second coming. May I ask what else needs to be fulfilled before it happens? Because people were reassuring this person by saying, you have to, this has to happen and that has to happen. So again, I just feel it's when they feel like they're losing control. A lot of the other talks were about come back, it's time, come back. I don't think they were directing that at Nemo, but everybody else, come back, it's time. And on top of that is not only come back, but the second coming is seconds away. So let's listen to Elder Stevenson, who took it even further and talked about the restoration and how those pivotal years early on were nothing compared to what we're about to see in the next 10 years.
This year, we have commenced a decade that may prove to be as momentous as any that has followed that unparalleled founding decade 2 centuries ago. Let me explain. Between now 2024 and 2034, we will experience the seminal events that will result in extraordinary opportunities to serve, to unite with members and friends, and to introduce the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to more people than ever before. We just witnessed a truly historic moment as we celebrated with tens of millions the 100th birthday of President Russell M. Nelson. Reporting on President Nelson's birthday, Newsweek wrote a headline that read, "World's oldest religious leader turns 100. They then listed the 10 oldest faith leaders, with President Nelson first on a list that included.
So momentous
You said that
birthday.
like it's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. So the momentous birthday that kicks off this incredible decade. What else is going to happen? Let's go to the next clip.
People are going to be joining the Mormon church in droves when they learn that the leader is 100.
Is the oldest faith leader. That's right. That's a draw. I'm telling you. And then what else is going to happen? Just amazing stuff.
Contemplate the unprecedented number of temple open houses and dedications that are planned to take place over the next decade. Even the potential of 164 temples and counting. Imagine tens of millions of you and your friends walking through a house of the Lord. The symbolic center of these events will be the rededication of the Salt Lake Temple and the activities associated with it. These will certainly be days never to be forgotten. 2030 will bring opportunities worldwide to commemorate the bicentennial of the organization of the church. Although it's too early to say how the church will recognize this milestone, it will certainly allow us to invite family, friends, and colleagues, and distinguished guests to come and see and to better understand the powerful impact it has in the lives of church members. And in 2034, thousands of dignitaries, visitors, and athletes from around the world will flood the streets of Salt Lake City, the stage for the Winter Olympic Games. There is perhaps no greater demonstration of worldwide unity than that embodied in the Olympic Games. The eyes of the world will be upon the church and its members, affording a multiple of opportunities to volunteer, serve, and share glad tidings through kind deeds. An event never to be forgotten. These upcoming moments will provide members of the church everywhere with increased opportunities to share glad tidings of the gospel of Jesus Christ through word and deed. A decade never to be forgotten. In a meeting just weeks before his birthday, President Nelson shared the reason he cherishes the phrase.
So somebody picked it up in the chat. What Elder Stevenson is saying, because prior to that, he did have more of the end of the world rhetoric, is we got 10 years, right? And this is exactly what they picked up on the faithful social media. If you go to the next slide, this is great. I just sometimes, I don't know. I question everything. So the next slide. So somebody said, well, according to Elder Stevenson, it will at least happen after the Olympics in 2034. So we have 10 years, everybody. We've got 10 years. Or do we? So somebody else says, I imagine we could have the Olympics in the millennium. Things will go on like normal, like nothing bad. Maybe the competition of Olympics is bad. And someone else says, no, I think it's really healthy for us to push our bodies and compete. That being said, it raises some interesting questions about whether or not resurrected beings could participate in the Olympics. I have never thought about that in my entire life, but now I can't think of anything else. Can a resurrected being participate in the Olympics? So, and Jesus will be back. So I thought, why wouldn't he compete? I mean, he's the perfect being, right? So of course, I know I probably jumped the shark, but here he is, downhill skiing, ice skating. And of course he's going to take every medal. Hockey. There he is on the bobsled, or is that the luge? He doesn't really have anybody behind him. Can't tell. There he is doing some ski jumping and of course speed skating. So have either of you ever thought about the fact that resurrected beings could compete in the Olympics? Has that ever crossed your mind?
It's a lot of gold medals for.
It's a lot of gold medals, but who else is going to win him? You know, the most perfected being in the Olympics.
And fortunately, Jesus will be on the U.S. team. In fact, he will be the U.S. team. We're taking home all the medals in 2034.
Yep, that's it. And again, you know, kind of being facetious, kind of joking, but not joking about this rhetoric that, as you saw from just very few of those comments, some people are absolutely terrified. They're making life decisions based on this. And as we all know, throughout the history of the church, it's come up every couple of years. The end is near. Don't plant your crops. The end is near. So I don't know. Do you find that rhetoric harmful? Are you guys as disturbed like I am, or is it just par for the course?
I guess life is tougher if you're stupid.
Yeah. Okay. That's one answer. Bill, what do you think?
Well, what I want to say here is that you can write this down, everyone. Get out your pen, get out your paper, mark this down, put it everywhere on the internet, please. I'm going to prophesy that another 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years goes by.
Whoa.
And Jesus Christ still hasn't returned. You'll be waiting forever for Christ to come back.
Yep. Like they say, Christians 384, Jesus is coming.
This generation shall not pass away.
Yep. But speaking of generation, there was also a lot of rhetoric about you are the chosen generation. You are the one. You have been held for these days. They're pulling that out again. And again, it's just to manipulate people. It's to make sure they're not going to leave, honestly. So
I really thought it was me. I thought it was us back in the day when I was a teenager.
We were told that. Yep.
Yeah, that I was Saturday's warrior, saved for the last days.
Yeah.
Generation that would usher in the second coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
But apparently somebody else has stolen that from me.
No, that's it exactly. But it seems to me they're dialing this up. And again, I believe it's when they feel their grasp slipping, you have to use the fear tactic. And I think that's what they're doing. And unfortunately, some people, probably the ones that have religious scrupulosity, are the ones that really get caught in this. And that's really unfortunate. So another thing, I didn't realize this, but this is the reason they're building so many temples, the end of the world. So why are we building temples at such an unprecedented pace? Why? Nelson asked on Sunday, because the Lord has so instructed us, right? He's told us. The Church of Jesus Christ now has 367 houses of the Lord operating, announced, or under construction. President Russell M. Nelson of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints announced 17 new temples. We're going to talk about this very briefly during the concluding session. And this article here is from the Tribune. Peggy and Tamara says, Jesus is coming, says LDS President Russell Nelson. And this is the reason for all of the temples. So, of course, they had to make a meme that says, where are all my temples? I told you I need way more. I mean, it's not in the scriptures or anything. In fact, the exact opposite is true, but it was totally implied, right? And this is what and that's what I just read right here. Again, my slides are in some kind of order tonight. I don't know what's going on. But Peggy and the Tribune says, get ready. President Russell M. Nelson, the 100-year-old leader of the church, told a global audience the Savior is coming again. And this is why they picked up the pace on the temple building.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I have to say this is very interesting as I deal with a lot of people in a lot of towns where they're building temples. And these are religious people. These are people that know their Bible. These are people that understand the scriptures. and they cannot understand why they claim that the temple is the house of the Lord, because that the Lord dwells inside. There are so many scriptures, and these are kind of paraphrased by AI, but you can look each of these up. So many scriptures saying that the Lord doesn't dwell within. He doesn't dwell in a house made by hands of man. In their mind, they see the Lord, God, Jesus everywhere outside. So it's hard for them to understand when the LDS come into their towns and say, this is the Lord's house. Even to be as specific as saying the Lord dwells on the second floor. We have that in a recording from a Curtin McConkie lawyer. They just don't get it. They don't understand this as part of temple building. So again, 17 temples were announced. Somebody made this meme that said, so I said, instead of feeding the poor and providing relief to the destitute, how about 17 new temples? And I will say, I've seen that rhetoric dialed up everywhere, especially on post and nuanced social media, where they're just like, seriously, this is enough. You know, what about feeding the poor? What about the hungry? What about the destitute? It's just too much. So some of the notable ones were Ireland, Dublin. I know that Nemo predicted that just a few months ago in a little short. He went to visit, and somebody on the ground there texted me and confirmed that the 1,111 members, that's including adult and children, in Ireland are thrilled. In all of Ireland, 1,111 members. So if we do our math, where it's about half that are active, maybe about a fourth of those have temple recommends, you do that math. How many people can actually attend that temple? But they're getting a temple, so good for them. New Jersey, that'll be interesting. Price, Utah, another one. Anyway, it's a whole long list, and there were audible gasps in the audience as they announced, people from those areas. So,
especially from the Dominican Republic, they went nuts.
Yes, they went nuts. That's right. I think they had those little noisemakers. Woo! Absolutely thrilling. So it's the most exciting part of conference. So 17 new temples. And if you're curious about this, the stats, I thought this is really interesting. We'll kind of end on this. Temple stats. Okay, so how many temples have been dedicated? Well, first of all, 367 have been announced, planned, dedicated. You know, they're in some form. They're in the wind, they're in construction, they're actually open. So 197 have been dedicated. How many are in operation? 189, with 8 under construction. Okay, how many are under construction, meaning not open, dedicated yet? You've got 54. 5 of those actually have dedication dates. 49 of those are in early to late construction. And I would put all the temples that I follow, and we follow on Mormonish Podcast, in that category. Some started construction, others, held up in court, kind of a thing. Temples announced. Here's where the numbers get bigger, right? Temples with groundbreaking dates. And now, okay, there's 116 altogether that have just simply been announced. They do not exist in any kind of form. They're just a proclamation over the pulpit. Temples with groundbreaking dates announced, 1. Temples with site locations announced, 53. Okay, so 53 cities probably aren't aware the temple's coming. It's been announced to the LDS members, but again, most of these towns find out about 2 weeks ahead of time. Yeah, so a lot of people don't even know a temple's coming to your town. Temples in the planning and design phase, that would be 62. So there's an awful lot of them that have just been announced and maybe being planned, but nobody else knows. Now, something really interesting I came across today from a couple different sources. Do you remember the excitement over the Shanghai China Temple? Do you remember that? I mean, talk about noisemakers and yelling in the audience and tears. They announced that back in 2020, right? Here, Church News, everybody said it. But in an article from the church from 3 days ago, when they're talking about the temples that were announced, listing the status of all 168 temples which were announced, they have now conveniently omitted the Shanghai Temple. It's not there anymore. I don't know what happened. What do you guys think happened?
Temporary commandment.
That's it. Temporary temple. Somebody said it was. So, because if you remember right around that, some officials from the Chinese government said, yeah, okay, no, I don't know. So I don't think there's any criteria to announce a temple. I think you could literally say on Saturn, everybody would ooh and ah, and you don't really have to live to see it completed. So
temples are no longer special.
Exactly.
When I joined the church, I think there were 15 temples on the planet.
Yep.
They were special. Now the temples, my sense is the temples themselves are not special. It's the number of temples.
Yep.
That's
the
special.
sheer number.
And honestly, it's ridiculous at this point. It is gauche what they're doing with their wealth. They're building temples to have temples. They're not being used. And it's all they can do because I guess mortar and brick don't have the free will to reject the gospel from the missionaries. They can make them do their bidding because they have the money to do it. So they can build as many temples as they want and pretend that they're growing when actually they're shrinking. By the way, I wanted to go back because something that had occurred to me with Gary Stevenson's, Elder Stevenson's talk.
Yeah, please.
He's doing something insidious that I've been seeing going on forever in the church. And what it is we are we're pretending we're the same church that got organized and restored through Joseph Smith. And I'm going with a faithful account of the history, okay? We're pretending that, but we're not at all. We have gotten rid of all the divine translations, the visitations, the revelations. That's all in the past. And what his talk does is underscore that and make an apologetic for it. He talks about the decade from 1820 to 1830. He goes over briefly everything that happened. First vision, here comes Peter, James, and John for the Melchizedek priesthood restoration after John the Baptist for the Aaronic priesthood restoration. Got Angel Moroni showing up not once, not twice, but 3 and then 4 times before Joseph Smith finally gets the Book of Mormon. And then he translates it by the gift and power of God. And then 1830, on that 10-year decade mark, they're organizing the church and everything is incredible. What is he comparing that to when he says the next decade is going to be, or he says maybe just as incredible? There is nothing miraculous about any of the events that he's talking about going to happen in this next decade. It's a 100th birthday, respectable, but not miraculous. It is the Olympics. It is the bicentennial of the church. There is nothing spiritual.
And temple open houses. That was the other one. Temple open houses.
Completely secular. He is comparing apples to oranges. He's comparing a decade of divine intervention by God to nothing except trying to have a good PR image for the church. These are the same and equivalent in his talk, and I think that kind of gives away the game.
Yeah. No, that's a great observation. I know we could probably talk for 3 more hours about everything. There was so much in conference, everybody. So honestly, if you can't watch it live, real time, just jump on social media. A lot of smart podcasters out there have really good takes on all these things. And it's important. And we'll be talking about everything in the next 6 months, I'm sure. So of course, we can't leave any kind of conference wrap up without Nemo's Jesus, Joe, and Russell count. Again, we've got Jesus 55 times mentioned, President Nelson 58, and Joseph Smith just keeps sliding farther and farther. They are not going to mention him at all, which is very interesting. But again, Russell beats Jesus. I think he does almost every time, which is extraordinarily telling. So that's it. Those were our takeaways. Again, there's so much more. And in the coming months, I will predict that we will be discussing conference like no other. You know we will. So final thoughts, and we'll let everybody get on with their evening.
Ezra Taft Benson got mentioned. He got resurrected and rehabilitated by his brother from another mother, Elder Bednar.
Yep.
We're not talking about that tonight. We may talk about that.
That's what I mean. We could just keep going and going. Everything's a tangent. Everything brings up somebody else's talk. It's I saw such an interesting thing, though, I'll mention before we close here. It was on social media, ex-Mormon Reddit. Somebody said, watch the last 5 minutes of conference. It's when they're all standing up, shuffling out, doing the weird side hug, the pat, the strange, how they have to walk through and pick up their wives. It's like a line and you meet your wife. There was a moment there where Bednar completely ice cold dissed and shunned Uchtdorf. I mean, this person, very smart on social media, said, watch those last 5 minutes. It's what they don't say, and it's their actions where you really see how things are going. And it was very interesting to watch. President Nelson was wheeled out, waving, cheering. Everybody else had to wait. You can't just stand up and go out. There's a whole protocol. So I watched the whole 5 minutes right before the newscast. It's pretty fascinating if you guys want to try to find that. So, all right. I think we did it. A lot to cover every 6 months. Right. So as we're ending here, Bill and RFM, do you guys have anything coming up this week that you would like to let everybody know about? For example, the Wednesday episode. What are you planning?
I can take this or you can,
Please,
Bill.
Go ahead.
Okay. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about conference, but in a very special and interesting way, which means that you're going to get to lead. It's not Mormonism After Dark. It will be Mormonism Live on Wednesday. But we'll each have a couple of things that we haven't talked about tonight. I mean, for instance, my former missionary companion spoke on the Saturday evening session of General Conference. He didn't mention me. I was hoping he would. I thought maybe, what are the odds? I've talked about him. He could talk about me, but no. But he said a few other things anyway. And the thing about this Wednesday is we're going to open it up to calls and people being able to come in by, what do you call it, with a link?
Yep.
StreamYard link
StreamYard,
here. If they want to do that, they can do that. Or they can call in and share with us what you thought of General Conference. Because one of the things I'm really seeing out there is I've given my thoughts about General Conference yesterday, and other people have done the same thing. And Renee Steelman has done that, and I know other people. Nemo has.
Yep.
Just a lot of different people. And the thing that's interesting to me is that when I talk to other people about what they thought about conference, very often they see things that I saw, but they see them differently. And they have a different insight and a different take on it. And it impacts them differently because maybe of their life and their experiences, or maybe just because they see it differently than I do. It's always a learning experience to me to be able to talk to other people and get their take on conference. And that's why I'm looking forward to this Wednesday. And I hope everybody in the audience here who's going to show up on Wednesday will come with a story that you want to share, or something that made you think or made you react in a positive way or a negative way. So hopefully that'll be a lot of fun, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, you guys are becoming the call-in king. I'm telling you, people love that. They love to interact with you. And it's really, like you said, it's really awesome to hear everybody's points of view. You know, we read the chats, so many smart people in our viewers and listeners, so many just brilliant people. And I love that you guys are able to give them a voice and let them call in and really have a chance to, you know, not just make one or two comments, but really have a conversation. So I think it's great. You guys have got it down.
Thank you so much. Is Mormonish doing anything tomorrow?
Oh, believe it or not, tomorrow is our 200th episode. I don't know how that happened. Somehow I've been sitting on this couch 200 times and turning on my camera and going, hi, everybody. It's pretty shocking to me.
Well, one of the things is that you work really, really hard. You are the hardest working person in post-Mormon podcasting.
Oh, dear.
Or show business.
Or show business, whatever it is. Yeah. So to celebrate our 200th episode, we're having a really interesting guest on, Kendall Christensen, and we are going to be talking about the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Honestly, it's a book you guys have probably heard of. It's a concept that we're going to talk about through the lens of post-Mormonism, meaning that when you're a member of the church, you're pretty much told what you have to give an F about, right? Every single thing. On the other side of that, you choose what you give an F about. It helps you improve your life, your relationships. You're able to make your own decisions. So it's a fascinating discussion. That's going to be 6 p.m. Mountain Time tomorrow night. So, all right, I think we did it. Bill, any final thoughts from you? RFM and I have been talking a whole bunch. Think we're all good? Signing off. Oh, he's even muted.
Yes, he is. And we'll close up. I'll tell the story. I know I mentioned it yesterday, but me calling Rabbi Joe Charnes while he's sitting in General Conference.
What was that?
So many texts. He picked up the phone and talk to me in the middle of General Conference.
They say, hello, I'm at conference.
Yes, now I know how Satan feels when he has a big score and leading somebody away from the truth.
Well, I think you were also texting our friend in the Tabernacle Choir, too, who always gets back to you. Nobody can resist a call from you no matter where they are. I can attest to that. So,
well, thank you.
It's a good thing. All right, everybody. Thank you. We will see you next Monday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, like clockwork. Thanks, everybody.
Elder Jeffrey Giles Holland here. That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast. And remember,